My ungrateful ex texted after graduation. Thanks for paying my law school tuition. My new rich man thanks you too. I replied, you're welcome. Then I called in all her outstanding student loans. She's now working 2 minimum wage jobs. I, 34 am, never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd plan elaborate revenge, but life has a funny way of pushing you past your limits. 3 years ago, I was convinced I'd found my soulmate. We'd been together for 4 years, living together for 2, and I was ready to propose. She was in her 2nd year of law school, stressed about finances, and I made what I thought was a loving gesture that would secure our future together. The relationship had been rocky for months before the breakup, but I attributed it to the stress of law school. She was always tired, always studying, always irritable. I worked 60-hour weeks at my engineering firm to keep us afloat financially while she focused on her studies. I paid rent, groceries, utilities, everything. But the real kicker was when she came to me crying about her student loan situation. She explained how her federal aid wasn't enough, how her family couldn't help, and how she might have to drop out. The tuition for her final year was steep, and she was looking at taking out high-interest private loans that would cripple her financially for decades. Being the supportive boyfriend I was, I offered to help. I liquidated most of my savings, cashed out some investments, and even took out a personal loan against my house to cover her final year's tuition. We're talking about $68,000. But here's the crucial part. Instead of me paying the school directly, she convinced me it would be easier if I just gave her the money to handle everything herself. She said she knew the financial aid office better and could navigate the paperwork more efficiently. Looking back, I should have insisted on paying directly, but I trusted her completely. She was going to be a lawyer, for crying out loud. I figured she knew what she was doing with financial matters. She promised she'd pay me back once she landed her first job at a firm, and we even joked about how she'd be the breadwinner while I could maybe cut back on my crazy work hours. The breakup came 6 months before her graduation. She sat me down one evening and delivered the news with the cold efficiency of someone who'd already checked out of the relationship months earlier. She told me she'd been thinking about our future and didn't see us being compatible long-term. She said we wanted different things, that she needed space to focus on her career, and that she thought it would be best if she moved out. I was devastated, but tried to be mature about it. I asked about the money I'd lent her, and she assured me she'd pay me back once she graduated and started working. She said she just needed time to get established in her career first. I didn't want to be the bitter ex-boyfriend harassing her about money, so I agreed to be patient. What I didn't know was that she'd already been seeing someone else for months. I found out through mutual friends that she'd started dating this guy from her study group, someone whose family apparently had serious money. The betrayal stung, but I tried to focus on moving forward with my life. The months passed, and I heard through the grapevine that she'd graduated with honors and landed a position at a prestigious firm. I waited for her to reach out about repaying the loan, but my calls and messages went unanswered. When I did manage to get through to her, she'd give me excuses about needing to get settled first, or how associate salaries weren't as high as people thought, or how she had other debts to prioritize. Then came the text that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was having coffee before work. The message was short and devastating in its casual cruelty. She thanked me for paying her law school tuition and mentioned that her new rich man was grateful too, since it meant she graduated debt-free and could focus on building their life together instead of worrying about student loans. I stared at that message for a solid 10 minutes, feeling a combination of rage and disbelief that I'd never experienced before. The casual way she dismissed my sacrifice, the arrogance of mentioning her new wealthy boyfriend, the complete lack of any intention to repay what she owed me. It was breathtaking in its callousness. I typed back a simple response telling her she was welcome, then immediately started making phone calls. Here's where her arrogance had created a massive blind spot. When she'd convinced me to give her the money directly instead of paying the school, I'd assumed she'd use it for tuition. But what actually happened was much more complicated and ultimately became her downfall. She had used my money for living expenses, housing, and other costs, while taking out the maximum amount in federal and private student loans to cover tuition. In her mind, this was smart financial planning. She'd graduate with the loan debt, then use my money to pay it down quickly once she started working. The problem was, she never intended to use my money to pay down those loans. She wanted to keep that money for herself while I just ate the loss. I spent the next 2 days making phone calls and doing research. I contacted every major student loan servicer and explained my situation. I had documentation of the money I'd given her, including bank transfers and our text conversations about the loan. More importantly, I had her written acknowledgement that the money was intended for educational expenses and would be repaid. What I discovered was fascinating. She had graduated with nearly $90,000 in federal student loans, plus another $40,000 in private loans. She'd been making minimum payments while living comfortably with her new wealthy boyfriend, probably planning to eventually have him pay off her debts or just ride the income-based repayment plans indefinitely. But here's where I got creative. I reached out to her loan servicers and explained that I had evidence she'd received additional financial support for her education that hadn't been properly reported. Student loan agreements require borrowers to report any educational assistance they receive, and failing to do so can result in the loans being called in immediately. I provided documentation showing that she'd received $68,000 in educational support that she'd never reported to her loan servicers. This created a problem for her because it suggested she'd taken out more in loans than she was actually eligible for, given her true financial resources. The loan servicers were very interested in this information. Federal student loans have strict rules about borrowing limits and eligibility, and receiving unreported educational assistance can trigger a review of the borrower's entire loan portfolio. Private loan companies are even more aggressive about these situations because they see it as potential fraud. Within 2 weeks, she received notices from multiple loan servicers demanding immediate repayment of her loans. The federal loans went into default status, and the private loans were called in full. Her carefully managed minimum payment strategy disappeared overnight, replaced by demands for nearly $130,000 in immediate payment. I found out about her situation through our mutual friends. Apparently, she'd gone into full panic mode, calling everyone she knew to ask for advice. She tried to explain the situation to her boyfriend, but he wasn't as willing to solve her financial problems as she'd expected. Turns out being wealthy doesn't automatically mean you're stupid enough to pay off someone else's massive debt, especially debt that resulted from what looked like financial dishonesty. The relationship with her wealthy boyfriend ended within a month. According to friends, he was concerned about her financial judgment and honesty. Having your girlfriend's hidden debt problems explode right after she moves in with you isn't exactly relationship goals. She tried to get a forbearance or work out payment plans, but the fraud investigation triggered by the unreported assistance made the loan companies unwilling to negotiate. They wanted their money, and they wanted it immediately. Her salary at the law firm, while decent, wasn't nearly enough to cover the monthly payments they were demanding. The stress affected her work performance. Law firms don't have much patience for associates who are distracted by personal financial crises, especially when those crises raise questions about the lawyer's judgment and honesty. She ended up leaving the firm, though whether she was fired or quit was unclear from what I heard through friends. Update 1. 6 months after my revenge plan went into action, I got another text from her. This time, the tone was very different. She was apologetic, desperate, and begging for help. She explained that she was working 2 jobs just to make minimum payments on her defaulted loans, and asked if there was any way we could work something out. She was working as a server at a chain restaurant during the day and doing data entry at night. The legal career she'd worked so hard for was effectively over. No law firm was going to hire someone with defaulted student loans and a messy financial history. The Bar Association was even asking questions about her fitness to practice law, given the financial irregularities that had come to light. I felt a moment of satisfaction reading her message, but also something else, a weird sense of emptiness. The revenge I'd planned had worked perfectly, maybe too perfectly. She was genuinely suffering, working jobs she was overqualified for, living in a tiny apartment, and facing financial ruin that would follow her for decades. But then I remembered that text, the casual cruelty of how she dismissed my sacrifice and rubbed her new relationship in my face. I remembered the months of lies and excuses when I tried to get my money back. I remembered how she'd stolen years of my life and tens of thousands of dollars without a second thought. I texted back telling her that she'd made her choices and would have to live with the consequences. I pointed out that she'd had multiple opportunities to do the right thing and pay me back, but had chosen to mock me instead. I told her that I hoped she'd learn something about how treating people badly eventually catches up with you. That was 8 months ago. Through our mutual friends, I know she's still working those 2 jobs. She had to move back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent on her own. The defaulted loans have destroyed her credit, so she can't get approved for anything. She's tried to find work in legal adjacent fields, but the background checks always reveal her financial problems and the circumstances surrounding her loan defaults. The Bar Association put her law license under review, and while she wasn't disbarred, she was sanctioned and required to complete additional ethics training. Even if she could find a law firm willing to hire her, she'd be starting over at the bottom with a damaged reputation. Update 2. A year and a half after everything went down, I ran into her at a grocery store. She looked exhausted, wearing a uniform from the restaurant where she worked. We made eye contact, and for a moment, I thought she might try to talk to me. Instead, she just looked away and quickly finished her shopping. I felt conflicted seeing her like that. The revenge had been complete and devastating, but watching someone you once loved reduced to that state was more complicated than I'd expected. I'd gotten my justice, but it didn't feel as satisfying as I'd imagined it would. A few weeks later, I got a letter from her, an actual handwritten letter, not a text. She apologized for everything she'd done, acknowledged that she'd been selfish and cruel, and said she understood why I'd done what I did. She didn't ask for forgiveness or help, just said she wanted me to know that she'd learned from the experience and was trying to become a better person. The letter made me think about what I'd accomplished. Yes, she'd treated me terribly and deserved consequences, but I'd essentially destroyed her entire career and future over money and hurt feelings. The punishment was proportional to her betrayal in terms of emotional impact, but it was probably disproportionate in terms of life consequences. I started researching whether there was any way to undo what I'd done, but the legal and financial mechanisms I'd set in motion were irreversible. Once student loans go into default due to unreported assistance, there's no real path back to good standing. The damage to her credit and professional reputation was permanent. Update 3. 2 years after my revenge plan succeeded, I received some unexpected news. One of our mutual friends mentioned that she'd started a small legal aid clinic, working with low-income families on basic legal issues. She wasn't making much money, but she'd found a way to use her legal education despite her damaged career prospects. Apparently, she'd been volunteering with legal aid organizations during her free time from her 2 jobs and had impressed them enough that they offered her a position. The pay was terrible compared to what she could have made at a big firm, but it was better than restaurant work and actually used her legal training. The irony wasn't lost on me. My revenge had pushed her toward actually helping people instead of just chasing money at a corporate law firm. She was working with clients who were facing the same kind of financial disasters I'd engineered for her, helping them navigate debt collection and bankruptcy proceedings. I found myself wondering if she was genuinely trying to make amends for her past behavior, or if this was just the only legal work she could get with her damaged reputation. Maybe it didn't matter. The result was the same. She was using her skills to help people instead of just enriching herself and whatever wealthy boyfriend she could find. Last month, I got one final message from her. She told me she was getting married to someone she'd met through her volunteer work, a social worker who knew about her past and accepted it. She said she'd never be able to fully pay back what she owed me financially, but that she was trying to pay it back by helping other people who were struggling. She thanked me for teaching her a lesson she'd needed to learn, even though the method had been brutal. She said that losing everything had forced her to figure out what actually mattered to her, and that she was happier now than she'd been when she was focused on money and status. Reading that message, I realized that my revenge had worked better than I'd even planned. I'd wanted her to understand what it felt like to be used and discarded, to face real consequences for treating people badly. I'd succeeded in that completely, but I'd also accidentally forced her to become a better person, which hadn't been part of my plan at all. I never responded to that final message. What was there to say? She'd learned her lesson, rebuilt her life on a foundation of actually helping people instead of using them, and found happiness with someone who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide financially. As for me, I'd gotten my revenge and proven my point about consequences. The $68,000 was still gone, and I'd never get it back. But watching her journey from selfish opportunist to someone who actually contributed something positive to the world felt like a different kind of repayment. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. Destroying someone's career and financial future over money and betrayal seems extreme when I look back on it now. But then I remember that text, The casual cruelty of how she dismissed my sacrifice and mocked me with her new wealthy boyfriend. She'd made a choice to be vicious when she could have just been honest about not wanting to pay me back. In the end, we both learned something. She learned that using people has consequences, and I learned that revenge is most satisfying when it accidentally makes the world a slightly better place. She's helping people now instead of just taking advantage of them. And I've moved on with my life knowing that sometimes the universe does balance things out, even if it takes a while and some creative financial maneuvering to get there. The whole experience taught me that the best revenge isn't just about making someone suffer. It's about forcing them to confront who they really are and hopefully become someone better. Mission accomplished, I guess. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.